The doors to the executive boardroom locked with a soft electronic click, and in that single sound, Emily Harrison understood she had walked into a trap. The polished glass walls moments ago, symbols of transparency and power, now felt like the sides of a cage closing in around her. Emily did not panic, at least not outwardly. At 35, she had learned that fear was a luxury leaders could not afford to show. She stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, shoulders straight, chin level. Her calm expression, carefully rehearsed over years of hostile negotiations and dismissive smiles from men who believed her success was an accident. Around her sat the board of Harrison Greentech, men and women in tailored suits, their faces arranged into masks of concern that did not quite reach their eyes. This meeting had been labeled urgent, mandatory, confidential. That alone had been enough to set her instincts on edge. Now, with the doors sealed and the faint red glow of the security cameras dying one by one, her instincts were screaming. Richard Cole sat 3 seats to her right, fingers folded neatly, posture relaxed in a way that suggested ownership rather than participation. At 42, he had the polished confidence of a man who had never been told no for very long. He was the second largest shareholder, a fact he reminded Emily of, often usually with a smile that never quite softened his eyes. When the general counsel slid a thick folder across the table toward her, Richard did not look at it. He looked at Emily as if he already knew exactly what was inside. "Before we begin," Emily said evenly, her voice steady despite the tension pressing against her ribs, "I'd like to note for the record that several security protocols appear to be offline. Cameras are down, doors are locked. I did not authorize this." The company lawyer, Mark Bennett, cleared his throat. He was in his early 50s, thin, precise, the kind of man who hid ambition behind technical language and polite hesitation. "These measures were taken for confidentiality," he replied. Given the sensitivity of today's discussion, the board agreed this was necessary. Emily turned her gaze slowly toward him. "The board does not override safety procedures, not without my approval." A murmur rippled around the table, quickly dying. Richard finally leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if amused. "Emily," he said, using her first name with practiced familiarity, "let's not get distracted by technicalities. We're here to talk about the company's future." That word future landed heavily. Emily took her seat, placing her tablet neatly in front of her, though her fingers felt colder than they should have. Harrison Greentech was not just a company to her. It was her father's life's work, the legacy he had left behind, when a sudden heart attack had taken him 8 years earlier. She had been 28 then, grieving underestimated and surrounded by advisors who had expected her to sell within a year. Instead, she had rebuilt the company from the ground up, steering it away from fossil fuel dependencies and into clean energy innovations that were now reshaping regional markets. Transparency, ethics, sustainability. Those principles had made the company valuable. They had also made it dangerous. Mark opened the folder. Due to escalating regulatory risks and investor concerns, the board has drafted an emergency restructuring agreement. This document transfers temporary executive authority to a crisis committee, effective immediately. Emily's pulse spiked, though her face remained composed. "And who chairs this committee?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Richard smiled. "I do." The room felt suddenly smaller. Emily scanned the faces around her, searching for any flicker of resistance, any sign that someone else found this as outrageous as she did. She found none. Some looked uncomfortable. Others avoided her eyes altogether. A few watched her with open calculation, as if measuring how much she was about to lose. "Temporary," Emily repeated. Defined how Mark adjusted his glasses, until market stability is restored, or until the board votes otherwise. In other words, Emily said quietly, indefinitely. Richard leaned forward now, palms resting on the table. "You've done impressive work," he said, his tone almost kind. "But your idealism has made enemies. Governments, competitors, investors who don't appreciate surprises. This is about protecting the company." "No," Emily replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "This is about control." The silence that followed was thick-heavy with unspoken threats. Somewhere deep within the building, an elevator chimed softly, the sound muffled by layers of steel and glass. Emily was acutely aware of her isolation. Her assistant was 3 floors below. Her security detail had been reassigned that morning without her knowledge. Every exit from this room was sealed both physically and procedurally. If she signed the document in front of her, she would lose everything she had built. If she refused, she had no illusion about what these people were capable of doing next. Far below, in the controlled quiet of the building's security corridor, Jack Miller paused mid-step. At 38, Jack moved with the economy of someone trained to conserve energy, every motion deliberate, efficient. His suit jacket hung neatly over his broad shoulders, doing little to disguise the strength beneath. Years in special operations had carved discipline into his muscles and restraint into his bones. He was not supposed to be thinking about boardroom politics today. His job was simple: monitor access points, report anomalies, pick up his daughter Lucy from the child care center by noon. That was it. Yet, something felt wrong. Jack studied the security monitor mounted on the wall, his brow tightening almost imperceptibly. One camera feed blinked out and then another. He tapped his earpiece. Static answered. His jaw clenched. Buildings like battlefields had rhythms, patterns. When those patterns broke, it meant trouble. He thought of Lucy, her laugh that always sounded a little too loud in quiet rooms, the way she hugged him as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. She was 7, resilient, too perceptive for her age. Jack had promised her he would be there. He always kept his promises. Up in the boardroom, Emily stared at the pen, placed carefully beside the contract. It was heavy, expensive, the kind of object meant to make decisions feel permanent. Richard nudged it toward her with one finger. "You're outnumbered," he said softly. "Sign it. Sign. Let us handle the mess." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Not in surrender, but in resolve. She had spent her life being underestimated. As a young woman, as a daughter, as a CEO who refused to play dirty. They believed she was cornered. They believed she was alone. They were wrong. Somewhere between the silent cameras and the locked doors between power and arrogance, a line had been crossed. And when lines were crossed, Jack Miller had learned long ago someone had to step in. Jack Miller moved quietly through the dimly lit corridors of Harrison Green Tech. Every step deliberate, muscles coiled like springs ready to release. At 38, he carried the presence of a man who had survived hostile lands and impossible missions, a man whose instincts were honed to detect danger where others saw routine. Today the routine had fractured. Cameras that normally blinked with unrelenting vigilance were dark. Doors on the executive floors were sealed by systems that should have required his authorization. Small discrepancies screamed to him, a code only his trained eyes could read. One badge slightly misaligned, a fresh scratch on the access panel, the subtle hum of tampered wiring, the orchestra of a calculated breach, playing for those unaware that he was watching. His mind raced through contingencies, each more precise than the last, each a mental map of infiltration and counteraction. Somewhere above, in the sunlit boardroom, Emily Harrison was surrounded by men and women whose eyes spoke ambition and greed, their polite facades concealing predatory intent. Jack clenched his jaw, his thoughts turning to his daughter Lucy, 7 years old, waiting in the childcare center. Every instinct, every memory of high-risk operations whispered the same warning: someone in that room intended harm, and it was his job to intercept it before it reached her or the woman he was secretly tasked to protect. Inside the boardroom, Emily Harrison remained outwardly composed. 35, her shoulders squared, her gaze sharp and measured. She surveyed the faces before her, as if reading a map of betrayal. Richard Cole, 42, leaned back in his chair, a predator in a tailored suit. His smile calm, but eyes calculating each movement, measured each pause, deliberate. Mark Bennett, counsel, shuffled papers with the air of practiced neutrality, though Emily recognized the signs of subtle manipulation. The folder in front of her contained an agreement designed to strip her authority under the guise of corporate necessity. As Richard nudged the pen toward her, a gesture meant to assert dominance, Emily felt a familiar thrill. They believed she was powerless, cornered, isolated, but Emily knew something they did not. When everyone assumes you are weak, you hold the greatest leverage. Mark began outlining the supposed emergency measures, his voice smooth and calculated. The board recommends temporary transfer of executive authority to a crisis committee effective immediately. He glanced at Richard, who sat with perfect patience, confident in the inevitability of compliance. Emily's eyes narrowed. "And who chairs this committee?" she asked, her tone deceptively calm. Richard's smile deepened. "I do." The implication was clear. Temporary meant indefinite. Emily's pulse remained steady, though adrenaline coursed beneath her skin. She recognized the trap. The room was structured to isolate, to intimidate, to force a signature. But her mind, trained over years of negotiation and high-stakes battles, calculated differently. They relied on assumption. She relied on observation and patience. Meanwhile, Jack advanced cautiously toward the utility closet nearest the executive floor. He noted the subtle scratches on the screws, the small evidence of tampering, the splice marks on the communication lines. Each discovery reinforced the magnitude of the plot. He memorized locations, considered angles of approach, and evaluated risk with a precision born of necessity. One wrong move could compromise the entire operation, endanger Emily, or trigger consequences he could not predict. His mind flashed to Lucy, her laughter, her small hand in his, her trust in his presence. That thought anchored him, providing clarity amid uncertainty. He moved with stealth, approaching each security post, each emergency exit, assessing the anomalies and mentally cataloging responses. The breach was sophisticated, but Jack's experience made him a predator among predators, unseen and underestimated by those who thought him invisible. Up in the boardroom, Emily's thoughts raced behind the calm exterior. She reflected on the company she had rebuilt from her father's legacy, the ethics that had guided her, and the enemies she had made by insisting on transparency. The contract before her was not just a piece of paper. It was a weapon, a meticulously constructed tool to wrest control from her hands. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice smooth, persuasive. "Emily, we are acting for the good of the company," he said. "Your idealism has isolated you. Let the board guide the decision." Emily held his gaze. "This is not guidance. This is an assertion of power disguised as necessity," she said evenly. A murmur traveled around the table, the first sign of hesitation among some board members who sensed the stakes, though they dared not express it aloud. They had underestimated her, as they always did, failing to see the authority she carried quietly, the resilience she had honed over years of impossible odds. Jack reached the final corridor, leading to the executive floor, his heart steady, but mind alert. Each step brought him closer to the epicenter of the threat, the intersection where corporate ambition and real danger collided. The pattern of tampered systems, the anomalies in camera feeds, the presence of unauthorized personnel all pointed to a single conclusion. The boardroom was not merely a room of negotiation. It was a battlefield. And Emily Harrison, brilliant and underestimated, was its unwitting center. Jack's thoughts sharpened, his body relaxed into readiness. He knew that timing would be everything. One breach, one miscalculation, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Yet he also knew that his skills, his discipline, and his commitment to protect those who could not protect themselves would prevail. The calm before action, he reflected, was both a curse and a gift. And the next moments would define who held control, who wielded influence, and who would emerge alive and unbroken from the storm that was about to break. Emily Harrison felt the tension in the boardroom tighten like a wire pulled too far, every second stretching impossibly long as the board members shifted subtly in their seats. Richard Cole's smile remained practiced, but the slight twitch of his fingers betrayed a mind calculating every possible outcome. Emily's pulse was steady, but beneath it, adrenaline surged, sharpening her focus. She could see the lines of authority being drawn and redrawn in that room, every gesture a chess move, every glance a threat. Her mind raced as she processed the legal jargon, the procedural maneuvers, and the subtle insinuations designed to make her doubt herself. At 35, she had faced hostile takeovers, public scrutiny, and investors guessed eager to see her fail. She knew how to read a room, how to predict the moves of those who underestimated her. And in this moment, she realized the stakes were higher than any balance sheet or shareholder vote. This was about survival, both for her position and the company her father had built from scratch. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne mingling with the unspoken tension that clung to every surface. She had to act carefully, deliberately, yet decisively, or all her years of careful strategy could collapse in an instant. 3 floors below, Jack Miller was moving with the precision of a predator in his natural element, his eyes scanning every corridor, every access point, every blind spot. At 38, he had the experience of someone who had survived situations where hesitation meant death. His body was taut, every muscle attuned to the possibility of sudden conflict. His thoughts flickered briefly to Lucy, his 7-year-old daughter, her small hand in his, her trust absolute. That thought grounded him as he approached the executive floor, his mind running through contingencies, escape routes, and strategies. He noted the discrepancies in security systems, cameras offline and sequence access panels recently tampered with earpieces that did not match the standard issue. Someone had orchestrated a breach with sophistication and precision. Jack's jaw tightened. They believed they were clever, but he had seen tactics like this before. Subtle manipulation, technological sabotage, and psychological pressure were all part of the game. He was ready to intervene, but not blindly. Timing and understanding were everything. A single misstep could alert the conspirators and compromise Emily or the evidence he needed to secure. Back in the boardroom, Emily adjusted her posture, her fingers resting lightly on the tablet in front of her. She felt the invisible pressure of a dozen eyes, assessing her every reaction, measuring her confidence, and calculating her potential failures. Richard leaned forward, his voice calm, persuasive, designed to convey inevitability. Emily, we have considered all options. The board's recommendation is for your cooperation. This ensures stability. Emily's eyes locked onto his. Stability for whom she asked, her tone precise, carrying the weight of authority that no one in the room expected from a woman so young. She had spent years building her reputation, proving herself in a world that discounted her judgment. And now her calm composure was itself a weapon. Mark Bennett, the counsel, began to outline the legal implications of non-compliance. But Emily's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating how each clause could be leveraged, how each procedural misstep could be exposed. She understood the game. She understood the stakes, and she understood that power in this room was as much about perception as it was about authority. Jack paused just outside the executive floor, noting the subtle shift in the environment guards slightly off their usual stations, a faint hum of electronic interference, and an air of unnatural silence that suggested the orchestrators were confident in their control. Jack's eyes narrowed. He cataloged each anomaly, storing the details, mentally weighing the risk of immediate intervention against the advantage of understanding the full scope of the threat. He had learned from experience that patience often determines survival. One miscalculated move could tip the balance, yet he also knew that waiting too long could endanger both Emily and Lucy. Every instinct honed through years of special operations, every memory of missions in hostile territory converged into a singular clarity. He would act, but with precision, timing, and strategy. He adjusted his stance mentally, rehearsing each step, each interaction, each potential confrontation. The convergence of his world and Emily's was imminent, and he was ready to ensure it tipped in her favor. Inside the boardroom, Emily remained focused, letting the weight of her presence unsettle the conspirators. She observed each subtle gesture, the slight hesitation of one board member, the forced calm of another, the controlled smile of Richard. All were measures of manipulation, but she had trained herself to see through such tactics. Her mind was a map, every clause in the proposed document, a node to exploit, every expression, a clue to hidden intentions. She knew that confrontation was inevitable, and when it came, it would not be brute force, but strategic calculation that determined the outcome. Emily's pulse remained steady as she considered her options: comply and lose control challenge and risk escalation, or wait for an external factor to shift the balance. Her gaze flickered momentarily to the doors, imagining the approach of someone capable of altering the equation. A silent guardian who could act when timing and precision intersected. She felt a quiet anticipation, a sense that the board had misjudged not her strength, but the variables they could not perceive. Jack reached the corner near the executive floor utility closet and paused, noting the sequence of compromised security systems. He memorized every detail: access panel scratches, splice marks on communication lines, irregular equipment, and unauthorized personnel movements. The anomaly pattern confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary breach. He traced the paths, calculated the response times, and mentally mapped his entry points. The stakes were high, but he felt the familiar calm that comes from preparation training and understanding. Every detail mattered. Every decision carried weight, and every movement could define the difference between intervention and catastrophe. He thought of Lucy again, her laughter, her trust, and the promise he had made to her to be present and protect her. That promise was a tether to reality, a grounding force as he prepared to intersect with the unfolding events above. The boardroom, sealed and tense, remained unaware that the balance of power was shifting silently, imperceptibly, with every step Jack took toward the epicenter. Emily Harrison's eyes never left the contract in front of her, though her mind was elsewhere, calculating, analyzing, preparing. Every subtle shift in the boardroom, the twitch of a finger, a frown that did not quite reach the eyes, the hesitant glance of a secondary shareholder spoke volumes she alone could interpret. 35 years of leadership had taught her that power often resided not in numbers, but in understanding the unspoken. The room was a cage of glass, polished oak, and carefully rehearsed authority. Yet she knew the real leverage was invisible, residing in the minds and intentions of those who underestimated her. Richard Cole leaned forward slightly, palms pressed to the table, a smile of practiced patience on his face. But Emily saw the faint flicker of irritation. He expected compliance. He expected fear. He had miscalculated. Jack Miller moved silently through the executive corridors, his trained senses attuned to the smallest deviations from routine. 38 strong disciplined, he approached the floor with the precision of a man who had spent years in hostile environments where a single misstep could mean death. The security feed anomalies, the tampered access panels, the irregular movement of personnel, all were pieces of a puzzle he had solved before, though never in such high stakes, corporate terrain. Each observation sharpened his focus. His thoughts flickered to Lucy, his 7-year-old daughter, trusting him completely unaware that her father's principles were about to be tested against human greed and ambition. Jack's mind raced through possible interventions, weighing risk versus reward, precision versus speed, preparing to act with exact timing. He understood that patience was critical. A premature move could compromise Emily, the evidence, or his daughter's safety. Inside the boardroom, Emily's calm exterior masked a storm of strategic thought. Every clause in the contract, every procedural recommendation was a potential weapon if leveraged correctly. The board assumed she would be intimidated by the locked doors, the absence of her usual security, the physical dominance of Richard Cole. They had underestimated her. Emily traced the patterns of influence, noting how Mark Bennett, the counsel, emphasized certain points with just enough authority to appear neutral while subtly undermining her. She read every gesture, every hesitation, every calculated pause, translating them into actionable intelligence. The pen beside the contract gleamed under the soft light, an executioner's tool in disguise, yet she was not blind to its symbolism. Emily's pulse remained steady, but her mind raced, anticipating the right moment to turn the tide. Jack reached the utility closet near the executive floor, the last checkpoint before he could access the compromised systems. The scratches on the screws, the spliced wires, the irregular equipment all confirmed the sophistication of the breach. He cataloged everything mentally, forming a precise map of intervention points. Each detail mattered, each error he corrected or exploited would define the outcome. He thought of Lucy again, the promise he had made to be there for her, and the way he had trained himself to act decisively when lives were at stake. His mind synchronized with his instincts, muscle memory, and training. He prepared to move, knowing that the room above contained a woman whose authority was about to be challenged, a board plotting to displace her, and that his intervention would need to be flawless. Emily shifted slightly in her chair, her eyes scanning the assembled board. She felt the weight of expectation and the invisible pressure of authority that had been usurped by those who thought they had calculated her compliance. She allowed herself a brief pause, letting the silence amplify the tension. Richard leaned forward again, his voice smooth, persuasive. "Emily, the board has acted in what it believes is the best interest of the company," he said. "Your cooperation ensures stability." Her gaze fixed on his. Stability for whom she asked, voice even measured. Every word carried authority and subtle defiance. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They had assumed she would be intimidated. They had assumed wrong. Jack moved closer to the control panel in the utility closet. He scanned the digital feeds, noting the points of interference, cataloging every access, every anomaly. The pattern was complex, sophisticated, but not beyond his understanding. Every second of delay increased the risk to Emily and the company. Yet a rushed approach could expose him or the evidence. He made mental notes, mapping contingencies, calculating timing. His heart remained calm, controlled, but his focus was absolute. Every sensor, every wire, every compromised device was now part of his tactical plan. He knew that once he engaged, there would be no turning back. The fate of the boardroom, the integrity of the company, and the safety of Lucy all depended on his precision, patience, and resolve. Emily remained seated, her hands lightly touching the tablet, her expression calm. But her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. She had prepared for hostile boards, hostile shareholders, and corporate crises, yet nothing had quite resembled the coordinated precision she sensed in this room. She recognized the signals of manipulation, the subtle cues of deceit, and she had learned to wait, to observe, to calculate. Timing, she knew, would determine the outcome. Patience, knowledge, and quiet authority were her allies. The pen, the folder, the locked doors, they were symbols. But the real power lay in perception, understanding, and the invisible forces she could marshal. Jack inhaled slowly, centering himself, preparing to move with the precision of a ghost in a system designed to conceal him. Each detail of the breach, each anomaly he had recorded, coalesced into a clear map of intervention. He moved with confidence, ready to neutralize the threat and restore control without alerting the conspirators prematurely. Every thought, every breath, every muscle was aligned with the goal. Protect Emily, safeguard Lucy, and ensure the truth would surface. Above him, the boardroom remained unaware that the balance of power was about to shift dramatically, silently, and irrevocably. Emily Harrison felt the subtle shift in the air as the boardroom's tension thickened, every subtle gesture amplified under the weight of anticipation. Richard Cole leaned back in his chair, his calm, calculating smile masking a storm beneath, confident that Emily would falter when faced with the locked doors and disabled cameras. The pen placed beside the contract glimmered under the overhead light, a silent executioner waiting to claim her authority. 35 poised and resolute, Emily did not flinch. She had faced hostile takeovers, investors eager to see her fail, and colleagues who had underestimated her intelligence simply because she was young and female. They believed she was isolated, powerless, and cornered. Yet she had learned the critical truth of leadership. Real power often hides where it is least expected in observation, patience, and strategy. Her hands rested lightly on the tablet in front of her, each slight movement deliberate, her calm exterior, a weapon against those who misjudged her. Jack Miller paused outside the executive floor, eyes scanning the corridor body, coiled with the precision of someone accustomed to life or death stakes. 38, trained in environments where seconds determine survival, he noted every irregularity, a guard wearing an unusual earpiece, a subtle scratch on an access panel, a faint hum of tampered systems. He cataloged each anomaly, calculating patterns, measuring response times. Every detail mattered because the slightest misstep could compromise Emily or expose his position. Yet the thought of his daughter Lucy, 7 years old, waiting for him at the child care center kept him grounded. He had promised her he would always be present, and that promise guided every decision. The stakes were not just corporate, they were personal, and every instinct he had honed over years in special operations screamed that this was a coordinated threat, demanding precise, decisive action. His mind, disciplined and analytical, worked faster than his heartbeat, mapping every possible intervention point before he moved. Inside the boardroom, Emily's attention was laser-focused. Each clause in the proposed emergency agreement, each phrase carefully worded by Mark Bennett counsel, was a potential lever if she could manipulate it correctly. The board assumed her compliance, underestimated her resolve. She detected hesitation in some members, a flicker of discomfort masked by polite nods, the subtle tension betraying the board's overconfidence. Emily recognized every maneuver, the projection of authority, the manipulation of procedure, the illusion of inevitability. She allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of her calm command the room. Richard leaned forward again, speaking in even tones. Emily, the board has acted in what it believes is the company's best interest. Cooperation ensures stability. Her gaze did not waver. Stability for whom she asked softly, each word deliberate, asserting control in the midst of apparent subjugation. The room seemed to pulse, waiting for her reaction. But Emily knew the board had misjudged her. The real power lay not in their numbers, but in her perception, patience, and strategic acuity. Jack reached the utility access point near the executive floor. The scratches on screws, the spliced wires, the irregular wiring confirmed the sophistication of the sabotage. He cataloged everything mentally, forming a detailed map of potential interventions. Every element of the breach, the misaligned badges, the altered cameras, the unauthorized earpieces, was a node in a network he intended to neutralize. Jack's body was coiled in readiness, his mind processing each variable with precision, honed over decades of high-risk operations. Timing was critical. One premature move could compromise Emily, the evidence, or Lucy's safety. Yet delaying too long risked giving the conspirators the advantage. Every instinct, every memory of past missions guided him as he prepared to act. He adjusted his stance muscles, tense breathing, steady his awareness extending to every corner, every monitor, every shadow. Emily's eyes scanned the room, cataloging every reaction, every micro-expression, every whisper of doubt. She noted the subtleties, a shoulder tensing a hand, brushing papers too quickly, a fleeting glance that betrayed internal conflict. These were signals of power, misjudged, underestimated, and she could exploit them. Her focus was total, her mind constructing scenarios, predicting moves, and calculating responses. She understood that patience was as critical as action, and the moment to tip the balance had not yet arrived. Every second, every micro-decision built toward the inevitable intersection with the unseen force below Jack, whose presence had yet to reveal itself to the conspirators, but who was positioning to shift the equilibrium in her favor. Jack's hand brushed a panel, and he noted the hidden wiring and the subtle indicators of tampering. Each element formed part of a mental blueprint, a tactical guide for restoring control without triggering alarms prematurely. He calculated paths, anticipated reactions, and synchronized his movements with the unfolding events in the boardroom above. The breach, complex as it was, had a pattern that he understood. His training allowed him to predict behavior, neutralize threats, and act decisively. The corridor was quiet, the hum of electronics masked by the building's standard operational noise. Yet Jack could feel the tension like a living presence. He inhaled, centering himself, preparing to intervene with precision, ready to restore balance, while ensuring the safety of Emily and his daughter. Above, Emily's posture remained composed, her fingers lightly touching the tablet, as she continued to assess, anticipate, and calculate. She recognized the signs of manipulation, the strategies intended to undermine her authority. The pen, the contract, the locked doors, all were symbols. But the true leverage lay in understanding, observation, and patience. She was not about to be cornered. Every heartbeat, every micro-expression of the board, every calculated pause was data she could use. And somewhere below, Jack was poised to intersect with this delicate balance of power. His presence, the unseen factor the conspirators had failed to account for, ready to tip the scales at the perfect moment. Jack Miller's hand hovered over the access panel muscles, coiled mind-sharp. The scratches on the screws, the spliced wires, the irregular hums of the building systems were all pieces of a carefully orchestrated puzzle, and Jack knew precisely how to solve it. 38, trained in the unforgiving environments of special operations, he had faced ambushes where a second's delay meant death. This was no different. Every anomaly, every deviation from standard procedure was a clue, a signal that the boardroom above was compromised, and that Emily Harrison, brilliant but underestimated, was in imminent danger. He traced each wire in his mind, imagined the path of the hidden signals, calculated the points where he could regain control without alerting the conspirators. Timing, as always, would be the difference between success and catastrophe. Inside the boardroom, Emily Harrison maintained her composure, but her pulse quickened beneath the surface. 35 resolute and focused, she had survived corporate sabotage before, but the coordinated precision of this attempt felt personal. Richard Cole leaned forward, his 42-year-old frame, imposing voice, calm, persuasive. Emily, the board's decision ensures stability. Cooperation is in everyone's best interest. Emily's gaze remained unwavering. Stability for whom she asked, tone even but commanding. Each word carried the authority of someone who had rebuilt a company from the ashes of expectation, whose intelligence had been underestimated at every turn. The room's tension grew subtle but pervasive as the board members shifted slightly micro-expressions, betraying the cracks in their calculated facades. They believed they had cornered her, that the locked doors and disabled cameras ensured compliance, but they had misjudged the depth of her perception and patience. Jack carefully opened the utility closet door, the familiar scent of metal and wiring, mingling with the faint aroma of the building's ventilation. He crouched eyes scanning every panel, every cable, every potential threat. His mind moved faster than the eye could follow, cataloging each anomaly, forming a precise map of the intervention he was about to execute. One misstep could trigger alarms, compromise Emily, or risk Lucy, his 7-year-old daughter, whose safety grounded every decision he made. He inhaled, centering himself, muscles relaxed, yet ready, heart-steady, senses sharp. He knew the exact sequence disable the compromised signals, restore camera feeds, and create an unbroken record of evidence without alerting the conspirators. Each decision balanced on a knife edge between action and observation. Back in the boardroom, Emily watched Mark Bennett, counsel, slide the contract slightly toward her. His movements were deliberate, rehearsed, a display of control designed to intimidate. The weight of the pen beside the folder was symbolic, a silent command to comply. Emily did not reach for it. Instead, she observed. Each shift of hands, each inhalation, each micro-expression across the table was data building a mental model of the conspirators' expectations, their weaknesses, and their vulnerabilities. She could feel the room's rhythm, the unspoken flow of power, and she understood that the true advantage was invisible. Patience was her ally. Timing was critical. Intervention from the outside was imminent, though the board had no idea who or what was coming. Jack reached the panel that controlled the executive floor's communication systems. He moved with surgical precision, fingers tracing connections, eyes scanning for subtle irregularities. He noted the slight misalignment of the security badges, the foreign earpieces on the guards, the sequence in which the cameras had been disabled. Each detail added to the map he had formed in his mind, a guide to neutralize the threat efficiently. He paused, considered his options, and committed to the course: intercept the compromised signals, restore surveillance, and establish control before any hostile action could be taken. The building's systems obeyed patterns, and Jack knew them intimately. He moved quickly, silently, executing each step with the exactitude of someone who had survived situations far deadlier than corporate sabotage. Inside the boardroom, Emily allowed a subtle shift in posture, an almost imperceptible adjustment of her hands over the tablet, a movement that conveyed calm and control. She noted the hesitation of certain board members, the controlled but forced expressions of others, and the slight twitch in Richard Cole's jaw. They believed they had manipulated the environment completely, that she was trapped, isolated, and under duress. But Emily had prepared for scenarios like this. She had memorized the layout, anticipated procedural manipulations, and maintained mental contingencies for every possible threat. She had underestimated observers outside Guardians unseen, whose presence would tip the balance at the precise moment. She knew that when the right person arrived, the carefully orchestrated advantage of the conspirators would evaporate. Jack disabled the signal jammer, first restoring the communication line. The camera feeds flickered back to life, each red recording light blinking steadily. He worked swiftly, efficiently, silently. He cataloged every anomaly as it reactivated, creating a continuous record of the sabotage for evidence. The presence of unauthorized personnel, tampered wiring, and misaligned systems had been recorded in his mind, and now captured in real time. Every decision, every move, every observation was deliberate. He paused only briefly to ensure that all cameras were operational and all evidence preserved. Every step he had taken was calculated to restore control to the room above without alerting the conspirators prematurely. Emily felt the faintest shift in energy, almost imperceptible but undeniable. The cameras that had been dead moments before now glimmered the red lights reflecting subtly off the polished conference table. She knew something had changed, though she did not yet see it. A silent force, moving with precision and intent, was correcting the imbalance, preparing to intervene on her behalf. Her eyes narrowed slightly, confidence solidifying. She understood instinctively that the advantage she had seemed to have lost was about to be reclaimed. Every move she made now, every word she spoke, would intersect with that unseen presence, setting the stage for a confrontation the board would not anticipate. Jack straightened, surveying the corridor and panels one final time. His plan was in motion. Every compromised system neutralized, every signal restored, every anomaly cataloged. The path to the boardroom was clear. His focus narrowed on the task ahead: protect Emily, secure evidence, and ensure the conspirators' overconfidence would be their undoing. He inhaled deeply, muscles tensed, senses sharpened, ready to step into the room where power greed and miscalculation had gathered. Above, Emily sat poised, unaware, yet confident that unseen forces would soon converge to reclaim the boardroom and rewrite the course of the morning. The boardroom was thick with tension, a silent current that ran through the polished oak table and the glass walls, reflecting both the city outside and the ambitions within. Emily Harrison's eyes scanned the room, calm but alert, every subtle movement and micro-expression logged in her mind. 35 resolute and disciplined, she understood that appearances could be deceiving. Richard Cole, 42, leaned forward with a practiced air of authority, palms resting on the table as if the weight of the world pressed through them, a smile on his face that tried to suggest control. Mark Bennett's hands trembled ever so slightly as he shuffled papers, just enough for her to notice. The board members, ostensibly neutral, shifted in their seats, uncertain, the masks of composure cracking ever so subtly. They believed they had orchestrated perfection, that Emily was cornered, isolated, powerless. They had underestimated both her resolve and the forces quietly moving to restore balance. Jack Miller's boots made no sound as he moved into the corridor leading to the executive floor. 38, he carried the measured calm of someone who had survived far more lethal scenarios than corporate sabotage. His training told him to observe first, act second, to calculate every possibility before committing. The security panels in front of him, the spliced wires, the tampered systems, all presented a familiar pattern, precise, methodical, meant to mislead. He cataloged each anomaly, forming a complete mental map of the floor, the corridors, the entrances, and the compromised systems. Each step forward was calculated, each breath deliberate, every muscle coiled in anticipation. He thought of Lucy, his 7-year-old daughter, and the promise he had made to keep her safe. That promise anchored him, giving clarity to his decisions, sharpening his focus. He understood the critical window. One false move could alert the conspirators, jeopardize Emily, or compromise the evidence he was methodically gathering. Inside the boardroom, Emily adjusted her posture, slightly subtle but meaningful, her fingers brushing the tablet as she reviewed the contract. The document meant to strip her of authority gleamed under the lights, but she did not flinch. Every board member believed she would react in fear, comply without resistance, or at least hesitate. They were wrong. 35 resilient, she had rebuilt the company from the ashes of her father's legacy, navigating the dismissive judgments of colleagues, investors, and competitors. She understood every micro-expression, every hesitation, every carefully disguised assertion of control. The pen beside the contract, the folders sliding toward her, each action was a calculated attempt to dominate the narrative. Emily's calm was not passivity. It was strategy, observation, and preparation. She had learned that power often lies unseen in the anticipation of others' moves and the precision of one's timing. Jack reached the utility access point nearest the executive floor. He crouched, scanning the spliced wires, the misaligned screws, the subtle disruptions in electrical and communication lines. Each anomaly was a node in a map. He had formed mentally every element, contributing to a larger pattern of control and sabotage. He noted the sequence in which cameras had gone offline, the irregularities in guard movements, and the placement of the temporary security personnel. All confirmed a sophisticated and coordinated attempt to seize control of the room above. He allowed himself a brief, measured inhale, centering his focus. Timing was critical. A premature move could trigger alarms or force a confrontation under disadvantageous conditions. His mind honed over years of operations, where a single second determined life or death mapped his entry, his intervention points, and the sequence in which he would neutralize each compromised element. In the boardroom, Emily sensed a subtle change in the atmosphere, though she could not yet see it. The cameras that had been dead flickered briefly, restoring some of their red glow. It was almost imperceptible, yet it sent a current of anticipation through her. She knew an unseen force was at work, acting to restore equilibrium. Her eyes remained on Richard Cole as he leaned forward, his voice calm, persuasive. "Emily, your cooperation ensures stability," he said. She met his gaze steadily. Stability for whom, she asked, tone even deliberate. The words carried the authority of someone who had survived underestimation, ridicule, and betrayal. The subtle hesitation that passed across some board members' faces confirmed her suspicion. Their overconfidence was their vulnerability. Jack executed the next steps with precise control. He disabled the signal jammer, restored camera feeds, and established an unbroken record of surveillance, capturing every anomaly in real time. His actions were silent, deliberate, untraceable, ensuring that the boardroom above would have eyes when decisions were being forced. Each movement reflected his training, calculated, efficient, unflinching. The integrity of the evidence depended on his discretion, and the safety of Emily depended on his precision, and the balance of power depended on his timing. Every breath, every thought, every micro-decision was aligned with a single objective: protect Emily, preserve the truth, and neutralize the conspirators' advantage. Emily, sitting at the head of the table, sensed the shift. Subtle, imperceptible to the untrained eye, the balance of control was tilting. She felt it in the quiet change of air, the flicker of cameras, the hesitation in the gestures of those who had believed themselves dominant. Her mind raced, integrating the information, anticipating the next move, understanding that the invisible force moving below Jack was about to intersect with her strategy. Her patience, her perception, and her resolve would combine with his timing to create an unstoppable corrective force. The board members, confident in their manipulation, were unaware that the scales were about to tip. Jack straightened muscles, taut eyes sharp, mind precise. All compromised systems were neutralized, all evidence preserved, and the path to the boardroom was clear. He moved with silent certainty, ready to enter, ready to act, ready to tip the balance in favor of Emily Harrison. Above Emily's hands rested lightly on her tablet, poised, calm, but internally prepared for the convergence. The moment was approaching. The intersection of strategy, timing, and precision was inevitable. Both Emily and Jack were ready. The board, overconfident and blind to unseen forces, was about to discover that their calculation had failed. A silent guardian had arrived, and the boardroom's power dynamics were about to shift irrevocably. Emily Harrison's eyes narrowed as the final camera flickered back to life, its red indicator casting a faint glow across the polished surface of the conference table. She felt the subtle shift in the room's energy before she saw the man who had restored it. Jack Miller stepped through the doorway with the silent confidence of someone accustomed to life and death stakes. 38, broad-shouldered, disciplined, he moved with a precision that betrayed every ounce of his former Navy SEAL training. The boardroom, once brimming with controlled authority and concealed aggression, froze. Every head turned expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. And for a moment, the room seemed suspended between heartbeats. Emily allowed herself a calm, measured smile. She did not need to speak. The presence of someone underestimated, invisible until now, conveyed everything that words could not. Richard Cole's jaw tightened as Jack's eyes swept the room with a controlled intensity, cataloging threats and measuring loyalty in milliseconds. Who is he, a board member?" whispered the tremor in her voice, betraying fear she had not acknowledged. Richard's face remained carefully composed, but Emily saw the tension creeping into his shoulders. Jack spoke once deliberately, each word dropping like a hammer, "Hands off the lady." The room went silent, the four simple words carrying the weight of warning, authority, and resolve. Emily felt a surge of reassurance. The invisible force she had sensed earlier had arrived. The balance of power, once assumed lost, now shifted irrevocably. Richard Cole's calculated calm faltered. As the implications became clear, Emily was not alone, and the room's orchestrated advantage had been disrupted. Jack moved with deliberate efficiency, neutralizing the two security personnel planted near the doors, his actions precise and controlled. Each movement reflected years of training in close quarters combat and tactical intervention. He restrained without causing permanent injury, securing the threats and maintaining control over the environment. Emily watched, impressed by the methodical precision, knowing that the stakes were far greater than she had initially comprehended. The board members, some complicit, others, unaware of the full extent of the plot, were now exposed to both observation and evidence they could no longer manipulate. Jack's silent intervention had transformed the room from a cage into a stage where truth could assert itself. Emily rose, her voice calm but authoritative. "Mr. Bennett, any contracts or resolutions executed under compromise conditions are legally null and void. I motion to suspend this meeting pending a full review of security and procedural integrity." Her words carried the weight of law, ethics, and corporate authority, amplified by the presence of Jack, whose actions had created undeniable evidence. The room erupted into murmurs of protest, but her control remained unshaken. Board members glanced at each other, realizing that the meticulously planned coup had been undone by forces they could neither predict nor counter. Jack's presence had not only restored physical security, it had created a legal and moral framework that Emily now commanded with clarity. Daniel Reyes, the IT specialist, brought forth logs detailing unauthorized access, compromised accounts, and the tampered systems. Emily's eyes scanned the information, confirming the depth and precision of the sabotage. Jack handed her the USB drive retrieved from the restrained security personnel. Its contents included full copies of stolen data, scripted outcomes for the board's decisions, and draft agreements with external entities for the illicit transfer of corporate assets. Emily absorbed the information, each detail reinforcing the urgency and the necessity of decisive action. The conspirators' plan, painstakingly laid over months, had been dismantled by precision timing and insight. The boardroom, once dominated by fear and expectation, now belonged to truth and controlled authority. Richard Cole's facade cracked. He reached for his phone, but Emily anticipated the move. Any attempts to obstruct or manipulate this investigation will be noted for federal review, she said evenly. The implication was clear. Jack's intervention had ensured that the evidence was now irrefutable, and any further resistance would only compound liability. Other board members, including the CFO and senior executives, shifted in their seats, recognizing that the narrative had irrevocably changed. Those who had been complicit now sought alignment with Emily's authority, understanding that continued resistance would jeopardize their positions. The FBI arrived moments later, called through procedures Emily had authorized once the evidence was secured. Agents moved efficiently, taking custody of the conspirators, processing evidence, and securing the boardroom as a crime scene. Emily remained calm, observing the removal of Richard Cole and Mark Bennett, noting every procedural step. Jack stood by, alert but composed, ensuring that the environment remained secure. Lucy's safety, Emily's authority, and the integrity of Harrison Greentech had been restored. The orchestrated ambush had failed completely. Emily turned to Jack, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying profound gratitude. Jack merely shook his head. "I was just doing my job," he replied, though the truth was that his actions had required courage, timing, and decisiveness beyond routine duty. Emily observed him, understanding that the man who had arrived unseen, underestimated by all, had been the pivotal factor in preserving not just the company, but lives, ethics, and principle. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. Some battles required stealth, patience, and the courage to act when others could not. In the aftermath, Emily offered Jack a permanent role overseeing corporate security. She understood now that protecting the company was inseparable from protecting its people. Jack considered the offer, thinking of Lucy, of stability, of the future he could help shape. Finally, he nodded, a small smile crossing his face. Together, they had thwarted a conspiracy, preserved integrity, and demonstrated that real power often lies in those underestimated, unseen, and unassuming. Harrison Greentech would continue not through intimidation or brute force, but through principle, vigilance, and courage. And Emily, once isolated and threatened, now stood, reinforced her authority, secured her trust, validated, and her company safe. As the dust settled in the towering boardroom and the conspirators were escorted away, the story of Emily Harrison and Jack Miller leaves us with more than just suspense and triumph. From a professional perspective, this tale underscores the critical importance of vigilance, ethical leadership, and the courage to act decisively when stakes are highest. True power often lies not in titles or authority, but in preparation, perception, and the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when underestimated. It reminds us that integrity is a force multiplier, and that strategic patience combined with precise action can turn the tide against seemingly insurmountable odds. If this story inspired you, give it a like and subscribe to support more tales of courage and strategy. Share your thoughts in the comments below with just 3 words: power and integrity. Let's continue the conversation on what it truly takes to lead with conviction.